Hi, welcome to this module on navigating feedback with pre-service teachers. We have a similar module for clinical educators, but this one is designed to support our university supervisors. So we hope you find it beneficial. Just establishing the goal of feedback is to give our students information about their performance relative to a particular learning objective so that they can improve their performance and understand themselves better as learners. Um, this is designed, uh, this quote applies to all learners. Obviously, our focus is on our pre-service teachers, our folks, particularly in their year-long residency. In that way, our goal as supervisors and mentors um, is to move our pre-service teachers along the continuum from where many of them are in a fixed mindset into a growth mindset and help them develop their self-regulated learning. This approach is not intuitive to many of our students, even during their senior year. Um, they want to be told what to do. They want to be told if it was right or wrong. And we know that teaching is different than that, and it requires reflection and self-regulated learning. So we may need to model some of this for them in order to support their growth along this continuum. We can't assume that they're ready to do this without our guidance and support. I really like this model with one exception that I will note. This shows how over the course of the year, the residency year, we move from more of a coaching model to a collaborating model. Um, our residents move from a dependence on us and their clinical educators to more of an interdependence where we are colleagues, um, not exactly colleagues because there's always that evaluative role that comes in, but more toward collaboration. Across the bottom, it also shows how we're doing more modeling, we're doing more specific recommending and questioning across this process, moving into more affirmation. And although this is the one part of this model I don't love, I don't really think praise has a whole lot of role in this kind of model. Affirmation, I'm totally on board with. But there are those folks who move through this in a way that they are deserving um, of praise of their teaching. So I also don't want to say that that is not, has no place. Um, the feedback that we give is concrete, specific, and useful. That's the kind we're aiming for. Not only is it concrete, specific, and useful, it provides actionable information. And we'll talk about this a little bit more uh, in a couple slides. These are the two biggest common misconceptions that we see in the research around feedback. Um, Praising someone isn't necessarily giving feedback. Um, Praise can be a good job, that lesson went well, um, those kind of broad things. And as the last slide said, feedback is very specific, very concrete. So I don't think those two should be confused. They may be used in conjunction with one another, but they are not the same. They are not synonyms. The other thing that I think we have to work real hard with our students in terms of developing understanding is that feedback is not the same as evaluation. Feedback is more ongoing. Just because I'm giving you some critical feedback that says you could improve in an area, it doesn't mean that I think you're a bad teacher. Evaluation is a separate thing and it comes at different points. Feedback is more aligned with informal, formative kind of guidance, not a judgment laden evaluation. Okay, so this is the first of two slides that really delineate 6 characteristics of effective classroom feedback. One is that it's corrective. It's not a you did that wrong. It's more like correcting a course. So as I think about teaching my own children how to drive, um, it's not me reaching across and bringing the wheel back to center when they're off base. It's me saying, "Come, move your wheel a little bit to get closer to the center, or move the wheel a little bit to get away from the edge." It's a gentle nudge in the right direction. We have the responsibility to be specific, and we have to pick and choose what we want to guide them to focus on, which kind of leads into the second point there. It's developmentally appropriate. We have to meet them where they are. We can't compare them to the resident down the hall or the resident in the other school that I'm supervising. We have to take them where they are and guide them toward the next appropriate step. Giving feedback is not a comparative exercise. It is, which leads into the next point, objective and specific to a criterion. So in this case, and in the case of our university supervision, we should be using the RIPET standards or our ProCAD's expectations as a guide. We should be pulling out the midterm or the final and using those as specific mechanisms for feedback. Feedback isn't about disapproval. It's not about comparing. It's specific to a standard. So if someone is showing up consistently 10 minutes late, 5 minutes late, 20 minutes late, for school, they're supposed to be there at 9 a.m. and they're showing up at 9:20. My feedback to them is, this is not acceptable. According to the ProCADs, you have to demonstrate professional competencies. Professional responsibility means showing up on time because people are counting on you. I need you to be here at 5 minutes till 9 in the classroom, ready to go. So I've established a standard that I'm comparing them to. I'm not saying that Sally down the hall gets here at 8:30 every day and you're not getting here till 9:20. What I'm saying is the expectation has been set at 9 a.m. And since you haven't been able to get here at 9 a.m., I'm going to ask that you are here at 8:55, ready to go. And then because that is an expectation of our ProCADs, that you are on time and responsible in a professional manner. So again, I'm not comparing them to the person who gets here at 8:30. That's not a standard. The standard is you're ready to go on time in a responsible way. Continuing with our effective feedback. Our feedback has to be timely. This can be super challenging in a situation where we're a university supervisor going in to the classroom, because research tells us that there needs to be some reflection time between what goes on and when we give the feedback. But it also probably needs to be within a day is the goal. So in this case, a lot of the times, if you're doing a formal observation, what we might ask is that you meet with the student by Zoom the next day to process through the lesson and the thinking and the feedback. And we'll talk about that process on our next slide. But think about how we can do that in a timely way with some built-in reflection time, but not 2 or 3 or 4 days out. Feedback, high quality feedback, is also actionable and guides the student to use it. So we need to think about providing and discussing options or resources for next steps. So if I have been observing a student and I've noticed that their instruction, especially particularly with asking questions, is not, they're not utilizing wait time effectively. I'm going to look at the RIPET standards and I'm going to see which one applies to that. We're going to talk about engaging students in an equitable classroom, maybe. Or maybe it will fall under something else, depending on the context. But I'm going to talk to them about the standard and how wait time is an important part of that. And I'm going to give them details. I noticed during this lesson that your wait time was only about 1 or 2 seconds before you either called on someone else, provided the answer yourself, whatever. Do you know how long you should wait before doing something like that? Puts it back on them. Maybe they don't know. Then I'm going to say, it's probably somewhere between 5 and 10 seconds, which feels like an eternity when you're standing in front of the class. So what I'm going to suggest is that next lesson that you teach, you literally count to 5 in your head before you move on to call on somebody or decide to provide the answer. And even before that, I'm going to suggest that you practice counting to 5 in your head just to get a sense of what that time feels like. So again, I'm providing timely feedback, specific feedback, and developmentally appropriate feedback, along with the support that they might need in order to practice to put this into place. The last piece of effective classroom feedback that we're going to talk about is how it should spur reflection or further self-assessment. So hopefully when I'm having this conversation with my resident, they are walking away thinking more about what we've talked about because of my feedback. All right. So the process that we're going to suggest is probably one that you are quite familiar with, but I'm just going to reinforce it here. Starting out a conversation like this after a formal lesson or even after an informal observation, we typically advocate to ask the student or the resident to give an assessment. Tell me what you thought of that. What do you think went well? It's always easier to start with some positives. In case, like many of our students, the ones that you are working with have a hard time with reflection, I've included some reflection starters. I have been known in the past to give this list to my residents, my interns, my student teachers, and tell them to pick one and use it to start. On the flip side, I have sometimes taken these and flipped them and turned them into a question. So tell me something you're pleased with. Tell me something that you're working through and problem solving right now. Those kinds of things. But these can be nice scaffolds for getting the residents that you're working with to a more thoughtful place in terms of self-assessment and reflection. I am going to go back. Once they give you this assessment, then we want to build off of that. When we start talking with them instead of listening to them. And this is a slide that gives us some options. We can use questions, flipping those reflection starters around if we need to probe more. One of my favorites is borrowed from process writing instruction, 2 stars and a wish. I use it with supervision a lot, telling them my 2 stars, often building off of something they liked about their lesson, and then giving a wish for what I wish they would have done better. Um, and it could be anything, and that might lead into goal setting, which we'll go back and talk about in terms of this process. So we ask the student to self-assess through maybe using these reflection starters. I build off that as the supervisor. Um, I always try to find something to cheer about because I want them to know that I am there in a supportive role. Some residents make it more challenging to find something to cheer about than others, but I always try to find something. And then we begin to wrap up with a conversation about the resident's choice in setting a focus goal or two. Again, this has to be developmentally appropriate. There's so many things that we could ask these novice teachers to start focusing on, but pinning it down to one or two is really important. And the research tells us that they need to focus on an area until they are starting to master it. Um, and so we might start with one goal. If I really want to work on wait time, I might just focus on wait time. We might talk about a lot of other aspects, but we come back to, you know what? Until you get this wait time thing under control, we're not going to be able to address some of these others. So for the next week, I want you to really concentrate on wait time. And then when I come back the next time, I'm going to say, all right, tell me what you thought and tell me how the wait time's going. And we'll go from there. And maybe they've gotten to the point, which you can confirm with their clinical educator, that their wait time has improved. And so we'll say, that's awesome. Keep working on that. But what do you want to set your next focus goal? Because we want them to get to the place where they're monitoring their own progress. Overall, our role is to, in conjunction with the clinical educator, confirm or not our residents' perceptions of their performance. Sometimes we have to intervene and say, "Ooh, I'm not sure that we're seeing what you're doing in the same light. You think you're really strong on wait time, but my evidence is that you're still only waiting maybe 3 seconds before you're moving on. So you've grown a little bit. You're not back at the 1 to 2 seconds of wait time, but you're still only an average of 3. So let's keep working on that, getting up to more in the 5 to 7 range. And what was the other thing you wanted to work on? Okay, we're going to layer that in. Okay, because we want them to have a say in what they're working on, in conjunction with what we know their clinical educators saying and what we are observing on our own. Our expectations for resident feedback from a university perspective can take place informally and formally. And we just want to be real specific with some of these things. So informally, we expect that as the university supervisor, you are communicating weekly with them, typically by email. Even on weeks that you visit in person, you should probably be following up an email that includes the clinical educator, telling them, reiterating what those goals are, what they're focusing on for this next week. This is a great way of being able to document communication so that if for some reason there is an issue that pops up, you have documentation that you have been addressing this with the resident throughout the semester. It's not just a brand new out of the blue, or the resident can't claim that it's a brand new idea out of the blue that they've never heard about before. You have this documentation that you've informed them that this is an area they need to focus on. Also, just like we encourage clinical educators to reach out to university supervisors if they have any concerns, we want you to let the clinical educator know if you have any concerns. You two are key parts of a trio with the resident being the third, and you, as the university supervisor, in conjunction with the clinical educator, are the first line of support for these residents. So this informal communication is real important. In the fall, there are some formal expectations as well for university supervisors. One formal observation with the clinical educator, where you both sit down and watch the same lesson or small group or whatever it is that the resident is going to be doing officially. And you meet together with the resident to discuss this so that there is a baseline established. You and the clinical educator are talking the same language. In addition, during the fall, you'll have an additional formal evaluation that you will do with your residents. This includes generally a pre-conference, the observation, and a post-conference. The post-conference and pre-conference can be via Zoom. And I'm happy to provide additional details on that if you want it. But the primary follow-up is to give feedback and to go through that process that was articulated on the last slides. There is also an expectation that both you and the clinical educator will complete the progression to residency 2 evaluation. Comments should be included on this. This takes place in task stream. There's a place for that. And especially when students are approaching or not meeting expectations, we need comments included in those areas as a mechanism for documentation that this is happening. We don't want anyone surprised by a lack of success, or we don't want anyone surprised, I didn't know I wasn't making progress. We want it clearly articulated so that, first of all, we can support them. So hopefully they can grow and actually be successful. We want everyone in our programs to be successful. But also, if they aren't, we need to be able to show that we've given multiple opportunities. If for some reason at the end of fall, there are students who are not meeting or who are approaching in a concerning, only at the approaching level in a way that's concerning, there must be a professional improvement plan created. Usually that is with the university supervisor and program coordinator who will take the lead on that with support and insight from the clinical educator so that when the resident comes back in the spring, this professional improvement plan is ready to go and really lays out the expectations for moving forward. In the spring, the informal just continues in the very same way that you have been doing for the whole year. There need to be 3 or more formal observations, again with written feedback, going through that process at pre-conference, observation, post-conference. There will be a midterm meeting with the resident university supervisor and clinical educator. There's typically a ProCAD evaluation, varies by program. So your program coordinator will let you know if that's something you need to do. And then again, the final evaluation needs to be submitted to task stream with comments, particularly if there have been struggles along the way. There may be concerns. We have a handful, a very small number of residents every year for whom there are significant concerns. We are hoping with the establishment of residency that those concerns will come up more quickly than they have when we only have the spring. But there are some steps that you can take. First of all, talk with the resident directly. They need to know through feedback that they are not meeting the expectations and that you're concerned. You need to let the clinical educator know you're concerned, coordinate with the clinical educator in regard to that. And you need to document this concern with a professional improvement Google form. This will take you to a Google form that you can complete that fills out the issue. You'll fill out the issue and what's going to happen and what the expectations are. And it is a way of formally documenting the concerns. And we can talk about how that works in another session. But you will also then begin to work, depending on where you are in that process, on a professional improvement plan in conjunction with the program coordinator. The bottom line is that we need you to be documenting your feedback all along the way so that if there are concerns, it doesn't become kind of a he said, she said. Everybody's on board. It should be real transparent. There should be no surprises with concerns. Okay, the 3 takeaways that I really want to leave you with is that feedback should be tied to a criterion, should be tied to a standard. We should be using the RIPET standards or the ProCAT expectations as a mechanism for feedback. The feedback should be timely. There has to be space in order for reflection to take place, but we're hoping that feedback can happen within 24 hours. We know that's not always an option. However, we should not be going for 5, 6 days, a week before we're giving feedback. It really needs to be in that 1 day, at most 3-day timeframe. And feedback should be actionable. That resident should leave the conversation with you knowing what they can do in order to grow in that area, and maybe with some supports in place, or ways that they can practice, or resources that they can look to for more ideas. We have resources for you if you're more interested in feedback. There are 3 books on here. I'm sure there are other great books out there on feedback, but these are all 3 that I can highly recommend. And we also have our own Dr. Kathy Pino, who has developed this POM model for mentoring our residents. And so you can find more information about it in the clinical education webpage of ours, but super helpful in guiding this kind of mentoring. Thank you so much. I am also happy to serve as a resource for you if you have questions. That is my role. You have access to me in my role of Associate Dean for Teacher Education, and I am happy to answer you. Thanks so much for all you do in terms of supervising our residents. We really appreciate your efforts and know that it takes a lot of time and effort on your part to do this well. Thank you so much.